Hi everyone, I'm Pete Tigers and this is the Fly Culture Podcast. If you follow my personal posts on Facebook and Instagram, you'll know I'm passionate about supporting creative endeavour. I feel if people are charging for a product and they're not paying contributors, something has to be said or it'll just keep happening. If I'm wrong, I will of course shut my big mouth. Last year we ran a competition for filmmakers to enter with a cash prize for the winner. It was a unanimous vote. The winner has joined us today to talk about his fishing career and what goes into a competition-winning film. I'm pleased to welcome Owen Bruce along to the podcast. Owen, it's great to have you along on the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm really good. It's good to be here. Thanks very much. Thanks for getting me on this platform. And it's cool and nice to meet you face-to-face online, so to speak.
Likewise. And for our listeners, can you give us some context of where you actually are and where we're speaking from at the moment?
So I am sat at home in Johannesburg, South Africa. I've been here for, I think it's 12 years now. Scottish origin, obviously. You might have guessed from the accent. And I call South Africa home. So I'm in Joburg. And it's cool today, actually. It's been very hot the last few weeks, but today's cool. So we're all good.
And what does that mean for you from a fishing perspective?
So South Africa is a fly fishing paradise. Like there's no way you can kind of overstate the kind of diversity of fly fishing on offer here. Like it's incredible. There's just an endless kind of source of things to do and experience, different species to target, different techniques. Like it's fascinating. I mean, I've done a lot of fishing here since I've lived in South Africa, but I've barely scratched the surface of what you can do here. Like I've fished a lot, been to cool places, experienced incredible stuff, but I've hardly even dabbled in what you can do here. Like it's just you could spend a lifetime in this country and not even come close to experiencing what's on offer here.
And was that one of the reasons that you moved there? Was it work that took you there, and it was a happy coincidence?
Work and relationship. So I used to come here for work back in the day, and just loved it. Just fell in love with the place. I think like there's all those cliches about how South Africa or Africa in general just captures people, and I was from day one. That was me, definitely. So I was here for work. Met my now wife in Cape Town, and here we are. House, dogs, fly fishing room, the lot. It's cool.
And so from where you're based, does that mean fishing's easily accessible? Is it a travel to get somewhere? Do you have somewhere that you call or consider your home water?
So the home river here is the Vaal River, which it's like an hour's drive out of Joburg to get to the kind of the closest areas. And then within or kind of closer to Joburg, there's a few other options. There's a couple of little kind of stock trout dams that I do fish during the winter. So winter is trout time in South Africa, but the main one is the Vaal. And then after that, basically in any direction, you can drive for as far as you want. And then there's all sorts of options, like even down to the coast, into the mountains, wherever. Like there's so much to do. But the Vaal is the main one. And that's it's part of the Orange River system. It's the biggest river system in South Africa. The catchment area is vast. So it even stretches from Lesotho into like closer to Joburg, and then it all flows into the Vaal, which flows westerly direction, kind of from Joburg, and then becomes the Orange River, kind of in the center of South Africa. And then the Orange River flows out into the sea south of the Namibian border. So it's a huge river. Like, I mean, it's thousands of kilometers long. Like when you include all the tributaries and all the rest of it, like it's vast. You can travel everywhere or travel to like all over the place, fish a river, and you're like, this river eventually flows into the Orange River somewhere. Like it's mind blowing how big this system is. And it's the beating heart of South Africa, I guess. Like it's there's so much agriculture supported by that river, all the towns, all the rest of it. Like it's a vast, huge system, and there's a lot of pollution issues with it now, but it is full of fish. Like it's amazing, the fishing on offer in that system.
That sounds amazing. And does that mean for most of that system that trout are the species that most people are looking at?
So that's all yellowfish.
Oh, awesome.
So I think South Africa's crowning jewel is the yellowfish. Like that thing is, if you were to sit and design a target species for fly fishing, it would be the yellowfish. Like it's just incredible. So it's a warm water species, and it basically inhabits the same kind of niche that a trout would inhabit in a trout stream. So it kind of lives in the same places, does the same things, very, very kind of similar to trout. And there are some places where you get both in the same system. So Lesotho, for example, there's yellowfish and there's trout in the same river. So in these kind of, it happens quite often. There are places where the two coexist together and do well. And that can be fireworks on the fly fishing front, definitely.
And we've touched on them in previous podcasts with guests from South Africa. Could you describe them a little bit for listeners, what they look like, and perhaps a little bit about how you fish for them? Would it be in a trout style?
Yeah, it's basically trout style. So if you were to take a bonefish, paint it bright gold, and chuck it into a river, that's the yellowfish, basically. So there's, I think, correct me if I'm wrong here, I think there's 7 species of yellowfish in South Africa, and it's like an indigenous South African species. There's various different flavors of yellowfish that exist further up north into Africa, but there's 7 main species here. And the 2 that are kind of most commonly targeted are the smallmouth and the largemouth. So the smallmouth is very kind of trout-esque in its behavior. So they're kind of bottom feeders a lot of the time. So they'll feed on nymphs and all the rest of it on the bottom of the river. And then as the hatches progress, they'll feed on the nymphs as they're rising, ascending to the surface, and then they'll hit a dry fly. So if you can imagine a bonefish in a river that hits a dry fly, then that's kind of where you are for the smallmouths. And the largemouth is much larger, and it's a big kind of predator. So it's got a much larger mouth, hence the name, obviously, for taking bait fish. So they'll take bait fish, crabs, frogs. They'll hit birds that fall out of trees, type thing. Like it's a proper fish, that thing. Like, and they grow massive as well, and they're incredible sport on fly. And so the smallmouth, it's very much the same as trout fishing. So upstream nymphing with an indicator. There's a lot of Euro nymphing happens, especially on the Vaal, because so even in Joburg, the Vaal is a massive river. Like think the River Tay kind of size, like it's huge. So there's a lot of kind of structure, rapids. So you're fishing in very fast, deep water to a fish that's generally near the bottom. So Euro nymphing is perfect for that. Like we do a lot of Euro nymphing here. But then obviously dries, they'll hit a streamer, especially in the Orange River for some reason. Like we don't fish streamer patterns upstream as much, although it is effective. But downstream for the smallies is they'll hit big streamers, dungeons, that kind of thing. And the largies is proper streamer fishing. So that it's almost kind of like bass fishing in a way. So you fish big zonkers and dungeons and all the rest of it, fishing to structure. And yeah, that's kind of the main difference. Those are the 2. And the other species, there's the large scale, the small scale. There's the Natal smallmouth, I think. There's another thing called a Clan William, just kind of Eastern Cape way. So all these little kind of different ecosystems have their different version of yellowfish. And each one has their own like cult following. You know what I mean? Some folk are obsessed with largies. Others go mad for Clan Williams, which are quite a rare fish, very difficult to catch. Like if you've caught a Clan William yellowfish of a decent size, then you've got respect from your peers, definitely.
And are those changes very subtle between those species? And you say the Clan William, for example, are they hard or easy to detect that is that subspecies of them?
It's kind of like an area. I think they're quite like the other smaller species are very hard to tell apart. Like there's always posts on Facebook. Some guy's caught a fish and he's like, "What species of yellowfish is this?" And then there's like 50 comments of debate trying to understand which is which. But the Clan Williams are in a very specific area, and then the largies and the smallmouths, they live in the same streams, but they kind of behave very differently. Like the smallmouths are kind of trout-esque, and the largies are big predators that they kind of stay in slower water and all the rest of it. But in the Orange River, the smallies are different, whereas they will hit big streamers. So you fish for largies and you catch smallies at the same time, which is fun.
That does sound fantastic. And you used the word bonefish as well. Does that mean there's quite an epic fight if you hook one of these things?
Uh, so the fight between a trout and a smallmouth yellowfish, for example, is incomparable. Like the strength of that fish is, I mean, it's probably at least 50% stronger than a trout. Like when you hook a yellowfish, you know all about it. Like these things are proper, unstoppable. It's good times. You definitely lose as many fish as you land. They kind of behave very similar to a bonefish in a lot of ways, even though they're in the river. I mean, I've never fished for bonefish, but the way that they kind of school and the way that they move around, and they'll in shallow water they tail like a bonefish. They're very easy to see, obviously, so it's a very visual style of fishing. So you're kind of in the same way that you would sneak up on a pod of bonefish on a flat. You have to kind of sneak up on these fish and cast correct presentation in front of them, and it's like it just adds to the allure of that fish, the fact that it can be so visual.
Yeah, I like the sound of that very, very much.
Yeah.
You've touched on Facebook and people asking what fish that was, which species of yellowfish that was. What does that say for the culture of fishing in your area? What is the feel of it? Is it populated by younger people, a mixture, older people? And I guess I'm looking at this from a fly rod point of view. Do you get a sense of how fishing feels there and where it's and who it's populated by?
So, I mean, all outdoor pursuits in South Africa are just massive. Like it's as a country, everyone is out and about and doing things, and fishing is just one of them. But fishing in general is huge here, be it conventional tackle or whatever. Like where any town you go to on the coast, there's guys fishing on the rocks. Any dam you drive past, there's people fishing. But I think fly fishing is definitely the newer kind of flavor of it, and it appeals to everyone really. There's definitely a big culture now of youngsters getting into fly fishing and enjoying it. There's a big competition scene here as well, surprisingly. Well, maybe not surprisingly. I mean, everyone enjoys it, but there is a big scene for it here. And I guess social media is the hub for the whole thing. That's where I check who's fishing where and who's catching and kind of the state of the rivers and all. And it's a growing sport, definitely. It's nowhere near as popular as in the UK or States or whatever, but it's definitely on the rise, and that's a good thing because I think the more fishermen you have out in the rivers, the more kind of desire you have to protect these ecosystems. And there's a lot of threat in South Africa from pollution and habitat loss and all the rest of it. Like things are definitely not as pure as they used to be. And I think that's the same for everywhere.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And from a license point of view, is it public water or how does that work for you from a fishing point of view? Are there areas, public fishing areas or clubs, or how does it operate
So
there?
on my section of the VAR, I don't even like, you don't like buy your license in the year type thing and then go out to fish. It's basically you rock up to the farmer's land and you pay the farmer 100 rand and you go fishing, or you go to one of the lodges or resorts or whatever on the riverbank, and they you pay your money for the day, which is very cheap, and then off you go, and that's you. And I think like in other places there's clubs that you can join and get access to certain rivers, and there's a lot of kind of lodges, like kind of game lodge vibe that will be based on fly fishing, or fly fishing will be one of the things that they do. So you can go and stay on whatever river or dam system and fish. And there's a lot of guiding operations. So the Orange River, for example, there's quite a few companies that do kind of US style drift boat guiding sessions. So you go for say 4 or 5 days, and you fish off a drift boat, or you get off and you fish on the bank, and then you camp on an island or on the shore each night, and that's a really cool thing to do. Like that's good fun.
Yeah, I like the sound of that too. It's you're really selling this beautifully to me. And so you sold the fishing to me.
To all my friends that own guiding operations after. No, but I mean, there's just so much to do. Like the yellowfish stuff, the trout things. The trout scene is massive in South Africa. Like, to be honest, when I came to South Africa, I didn't even bring fly fish. I didn't bring fishing gear. Like I knew there was fishing here, but it wasn't like, oh my God, I'm moving to South Africa with all this fishing. Like I just kind of came here and the fishing kind of found me in a way. It wasn't like I knew it was here, but it was a couple of years before I got into the fishing here. Like I met some mates through the film industry, and that's what got me started. Basically, that's how I got into it here. And
nice.
And in the first couple of years, I was so busy, I didn't really have the chance to fish that much. But it's worked out well now.
And it reminds me of a wonderful story. We had the author of the book Trout, the story of the trout. I can't quite remember what it is now, but it talked about where the trout spread out through the then British Empire and how they went to great lengths to put them into New Zealand and Australia. And it was salmon originally that they wanted to put in the rivers there. And somebody said, can I throw some trout in? And of course, the salmon went off and didn't come back. And then the trout flourished. Yet in South Africa, I think it was a gentleman, I think he wanted to earn the love of a certain young lady, and to impress her father, he decided he was going to walk from the bottom of Africa to the top. And he decided these streams were quite a good place for trout. And instead of having hatcheries and everything, he literally had buckets of trout, I guess, fry, that he threw into the river. And that's where a lot of that started from. I'm sure there's some experts who are going to correct that a little bit, but that was the essence of how trout were populated in some of those streams. And I just love the sound of it from some respects, although, of course, not being a native fish, there's an argument there as well. But I think it's a wonderful story of somebody just saying, well, let's see if we can make this work. It's pretty cool, isn't it?
No. So that's exactly what happened. There's other countries. I think if you were to like roll out a world map on the table and put a flag where there was once a British colony, each of those flags now, there would be a trout population of some sort, because someone back in the day has stocked trout. And they've done really well here in South Africa. Like, it's perfect trout water. I mean, bottom line, it is an invasive species, which is another conversation, definitely. But they've done so well here. And it doesn't seem that they've impacted the local species too much. I mean, I'm not an expert on it. I'm sure like proper fish biologists in South Africa probably hate trout because it has to be detrimental to what was there beforehand. But I think it's now such an important economic thing as well that they kind of let it fly. I think maybe a couple of years ago, they were talking about trying to eradicate trout from South Africa because they're an invasive species. And there was huge uproar because it's such an important thing here, like just the fly fishing industry. And then the second thing was like, how would you even begin to do that? Like, how are you going to go into thousands of kilometers worth of river and only remove rainbow trout and brown trout without decimating everything else? Like, it's just, I think they're so far gone now in that respect. To remove them would be more damaging. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, no, you're,
yeah.
yeah. So we're getting a sense of the fishing, and it, like you say, it sounds like you're in some form of paradise from that point of view. And I'd like to learn a little bit more about yourself. And how would you describe yourself as a fly angler?
So I was brought up and brought into fly fishing by my father, who's a militant purist. So I definitely still kind of maintain that kind of thing. But so he'd always fished. He was a fanatic fisherman, still is now. And there was no kind of point at which I said I wanted to go fishing. Like it always happened. Like as soon as I was old enough to hold either a spinning rod or fly rod, then I was just straight into it, and off we went together. And also with the fly tying, like I've tied as long as I can remember. I think one of my earliest memories of fishing is actually involves fly tying, and I can remember my old man tying at the kitchen table, and I was so small I couldn't see over the table. So that was like, yeah, I mean, so I've tied as long as I've fished, and I think the fly tying is as important as the actual catching of, or it definitely is as important as the catching of the fish. Like I definitely spend a lot more time tying than I do actually fishing these days. Like it's my sanity, my kind of go to place. So Catherine, my wife, does yoga, and that's her sanity, and I fly tie when we're at home.
And so, do you tie to fill boxes, or do you tie to replace flies that you may have lost on a trip?
Both. It's just like a constant kind of production line. I mean, I don't think I ever need to tie another fly ever again. Like numbers is not a problem, but it's just the therapy of tying. Like it's good. Like it's great to have a trip to tie for, and you're always kind of analyzing what you're going to do, and you're always kind of being creative and thoughtful and working things out. But it's just such a zen kind of process. Like if I've had a heavy day, I'll sit down, tie for half an hour, and it's problem solved. You know what I mean? Because it takes you to that place as well. Like if you're sitting tying dry flies for Lesotho, then you're in Lesotho. If you're tying big streamers for the Orange River, then for half an hour you're in the Orange River. Like it's a great way of compartmentalizing things away from the real world. I think.
That's beautifully put. And we've touched on it a few times on here. And I've said to people, I've not tied for a little while now. I've lost the love of it for whatever reason. And some of my friends are much better fly tyers than me. So that's probably got something to do with it. But when you sit at the vice, yes, you're being creative, but also, like you say, that your mind moves away, doesn't it? And you may be picturing a river, you may be picturing a pool, you may be picturing a rising trout. And that's part of that process, isn't it? When you're creating that fly, you have a moment in your mind that you're thinking about, don't you?
No, 100%, definitely, and it takes you to that place. I mean, I've tied flies for places that I'll clearly never go to, like just out of interest. You know what I mean? Like you see weird and wonderful patterns online, and you kind of recreate them just out of love of the art form, I guess. Definitely. Like, I mean, a lot of people tie flies just because they need flies to fish, but for me, it's a lot more than that. Like, it's a creative output. You know, whether you draw or paint or you're a sculptor or whatever, like everyone needs to make cool things just to feel better, I think. And fly tying for me is definitely that. Or whether it's playing music or whatever, like it's a very similar headspace that you go to, I think.
And have you ever thought about some of these or looked at the classic salmon flies? And that leads itself beautifully into another book, The Feather Thief, as well.
Uh, I've never actually got into it. I think I'm intimidated to do it. Like I have to do it. Gaudi keeps hankering at me to get into classic salmon flies, but I think that would be uh, a rabbit hole to go down to, which I think maybe I'm not quite at the correct stage of midlife crisis to get into classic salmon flies yet. You know what I mean? Like that's a commitment which I will do. It's something that I've got on the back burner, and yeah, I really want to do that. I'd love to. I mean, Gordy's been a big inspiration on his classics. His things are just like frighteningly good. He's so talented when it comes to classics.
And he's creative like yourself as well in that sense. And there is, as I said at the beginning, there is a correlation, isn't there, between creativity and maybe even be able to say fly fishing and the art form that it actually is, be it the casting, be it whatever that may be, the photography, the locations, and we're of course come onto the film as well. But the whole thing, and I often say to people that the photogenic nature of fly fishing really is there for all to see, isn't it?
100%. But I mean, it's like appreciation of the art form of what you're doing, like the kind of, be it the fly tying, the kind of the balance and the flow of actually fishing, you know what I mean, of like the casting and the line control and all the rest of it is a very kind of artistic thing. And then the connection between you and nature can be very artistic as well, like the way you appreciate and see things that are around you. Like that to me is as important, if not more important than catching fish. Like you can go and have an incredible day in a stunning location on a river, not see a single fish, and it's still a fantastic day. You know what I mean? Because you're out and about and you're just in nature and you just see the things that you would never see.
Do you think that we are swinging around to that view more globally or more widely, that people are saying, look, it's not the success of a day isn't necessarily on numbers or size of fish. It's a little bit more than that. Do you sense that's changing a
Yeah,
little bit?
100%, definitely. And I think where you see that is in the films that come out. So, I mean, the fly fishing movies, it used to be, look at me, I went here and I caught all of these massive fish. And you're like, okay, fair play. Like, that's cool. And it's good fun to do that, definitely. But now, a lot of the films that come out, it's not just about that. It is about where you go. It's about who you're with. It's like why you're there. I love the Podsaw films, Rolf Nylander, just being out in the wilderness. Those are just like I can watch those and just back to back and just love it. And it's not even about, I mean, they catch incredible fish, but it's just about where they are. And I really love the Spate films by Colin McLeod. Like that kind of captures that essence entirely. Like it's not all about the fish. If it was just about the fish, it would just get totally boring, I think.
And do you think that is, I hope in our little way with fly culture, we're doing that with the films that you make, with the films that Colin as well and others and Rolf make as well. Do you think that is filtering down to people to allow them to see things through a slightly different lens?
Definitely, 100%. Like I think if you went online and watched older films, you were kind of being shown that the point of the exercise was to catch as many massive fish as possible, and it's just not like that. There's just, I mean, fun as that is, like there's just more to it. To me personally, like I mean, people will go out in a day's fishing and they won't catch anything, and they'll be like pissed off because it's been a bad day and whatever. And I'll be like, yeah, but look where you are, right? Like you're you're not in the office. We're out here fishing. Or often, like I'll go, like back in the day, I would go to Lusutu before we shot that movie, or go to other places, and the guys are like, what do you want to catch? What's your plan? And I'd just be like, I'm just glad I'm not at work, buddy. Let's just see what happens, and enjoy the time here. Like that's like it's, yeah. I mean, that's a priority for me, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I often think if it's a little bit blowy and people are whinging about the wind, I'd say if we were in South America right now casting for sea trout and there's 100 km/h wind, we wouldn't be whinging and trying to put those things into perspective as well. And it does feel as though that culture is starting to emerge a little bit more. And I think that's good. And I think where people are looking for fish in a different way now, and it may be the more or less traditional routes, that they're looking to try and experience wilderness, as you've said, a little bit more, and perhaps focus more on wild fish. And do you get that sense too?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's all about being out in the wilderness, out in a new place, like a kind of untouched environment, and going after like pure wild fish. I mean, I'll happily go and fish a stocky pond, either here or in the UK. Like, it's good fun. It's a day out. I do enjoy it, but it's never going to compare to sight fishing and on the Bakong and Lesotho or any of these other incredible streams in the Tal or whatever. Like, it's just a different. I think you just get a different kind of connection with nature. I think as humans, that's what everyone is trying to do.
It's interesting that you mention the stock ponds as well, because we're seeing here that some have closed, some high profile ones have recently closed, which is very, very sad to hear, that ones that I've fished myself, yet they still have an incredibly important role to play within our tapestry of fly fishing, don't they?
100%, definitely. So, I mean, the big one obviously is Diva Springs. And then I saw this week, what was it? Ibrook and Draco, and the other one closed. And then, like, because so this is social media in action. I mean, I would have no idea that Diva Springs had closed down if it wasn't for Facebook and all these other places. And they're vital for everyone. I mean, I learned to fish a lot on the little stocky ponds at home, and it's fantastic. That's everyone's. Or a lot of people, their journey starts there. Even in South Africa, people learn to fish. There's an area here called Dahlstrom, which is high mountainous, kind of cold region in between Joburg and Kruger, which is a little trout mecca, and it's full of little stock trout dams, and it's fantastic. And everyone has been there as a child trout fishing with their family, you know what I mean? And it's important. But I think, like, I mean, I read about Diva Springs particularly when I was young, and it was this mythical place, and I was obsessed, and I always wanted to go there. And even though maybe my horizons have been broadened a little bit, if I was back in the UK and I was on a film shoot an hour away from Diva Springs, I would be there the next day just to experience that place. And I think you kind of, it's horses for courses, you know what I mean? Like, if you're fishing, sight fishing on a 2-weight to tiny trout, that's one thing. And if you're fishing a stocky pond, then that's another. And they can be as enjoyable as each other. I mean, everyone wants to catch big fish. I mean, it is fun. At the end of the day, that's why it was so popular. And I mean, obviously the place was very expensive and all, but not everyone can go to Jurassic Lake or Kamchatka, you know what I mean, just to catch the fish of their dreams. Whereas if you can do it in the south of England or any of the 100 of other places that you can, then brilliant. It's great. And it keeps the industry afloat. I mean, how many, like the gear sales, the guys that tie flies, all this stuff, like it's a massive thing. So all these places that we lose, it's heartbreaking. I mean, that place Diva was iconic. I mean, it used to get a lot of flack from the traditionalists and whatever, but I mean, I'm all for it. Like, people enjoy different things in that.
Yeah, they're really important to have, and it's heartbreaking, as you say, to hear that news of it. And it does make me wonder if we are swinging a little bit due to price constraints, and that's how the marketplace is, that people have got to be in these businesses to make money. And I think it's over £100 to fish there, which, if you don't get to fish a great deal and you want to try and catch a £10 rainbow or a brown, and I was talking to my friend Perry about it yesterday, and he said, you know, he had a £16 brown out of that first lake at Diva, which he still remembers really well. And I remember catching lovely fish there and stalking them. I was very fortunate to fish with Pete Cockwell there. And I learned so much about, instead of throwing it out and pulling it back and you might catch a big one, what about walking around and finding a gap and finding that fish? Yeah, and casting to it there. And things have become more expensive. And rods, you know, we're talking at rods through £1,000 now. And everyone needs to make money, and I understand that as well. But it's difficult sometimes to justify those price levels as well, isn't it? And it's a really difficult balance for businesses and for end users to say, look, am I going to buy a rod at that? Can I treat myself to a day? So we're in a difficult spell for everyone, really, aren't we, right now?
No, 100%. Like, I mean, times are tough across the board. I think anyone who's doing well in this kind of climate has found a way of doing well, maybe not to the detriment of other people, but has found a way through the dark times, if that makes sense. But I mean, the cost of things is going up across the board. Like, I see it in my industry, even like, I mean, even down to something as maybe mundane isn't the correct term, but something as simple as fly fishing. Obviously, it gets more expensive. Like, everything is on the way up. Like, the technology is changing. I mean, the amount of money that it must have taken to stock Diva Springs, like just the time it takes to grow those fish, to maintain the land, like to keep the water clean, all the rest of it. Like, I mean, that place must have just been frightening. And I think numbers had obviously gone down. I saw they raised the prices again. I think it was £140 for a 4-fish ticket. I mean, £140. I mean, fair enough. People pay it. And that's what it costs to have a fishery that's full of £15 brown trout. And at the end of the day, I think cash is king. And if you're not making enough money, then the powers that be are going to come and get you. Like, it's how it works across the board with everything. And it's sad to see.
Yeah, I think everyone's margins have been squeezed. I'm sure, like you say, getting those fish to that size for people is an expensive process, and you've got to try and make money out of it somehow or somewhere, or at least recoup some of that. And it becomes problematic, doesn't it, from that point of view? And I know from our magazine point of view, print costs, paper costs, postage costs, everything's eating into the margin the whole time. And it's a difficult bridge to sort of balance on. It's a tightrope in many respects as well. And I'm sure this is happening globally across, we look at our tiny little world of fishing, but it's happening everywhere, I guess, isn't it?
No, 100%, definitely. I mean, even in the film industry now, we're just being squeezed hard with budgets. Like, everyone is on a downturn everywhere. Like, it's tough times for everyone. And I think, like, the Diva Springs thing as well, I mean, that's obviously the classic example when you're having this discussion. But I mean, how long does it take to grow a £15 brown trout? I mean, that's like if it's in a stock pen, 4 or 5 year old fish. So the investment from the company, if you like, of time and money going into that fish. So I mean, it's a miracle that they kept it down to £140 when you when you think about it. Yeah. Like, I mean, what's the output cost wise on that single fish? And they've got ponds full of them. Or had. I mean, God knows what's going to happen to those fish now. I hope they get relocated to somewhere else.
Yeah, fingers crossed. You touched on the film industry, and for listeners, is that your profession? Is that what you work in?
Yeah. So, film industry, that's my day job. That's been my career since, I think it was 2006 that I embarked on the journey, and that's what I've done ever since. So it's been cameras and all the rest of it since then.
And what are you specialising in? What sort of films are you making?
So my main title right now, or my main job on a film set, is Digital Imaging Technician, DIT for short, and I mostly do commercials here in South Africa, local and international work, but it's mostly commercials. So the DIT it's a new role that came around with the advent of digital cameras. So if you think back in the day, you would shoot on film, be it stills or film camera or whatever, and then you take the film and you take it to the film lab and it's processed and then you get your images back. DIT is basically the digital equivalent of that process. So the responsibilities include, so you're basically managing the footage in its entirety, be that from acquisition within the camera, so making sure camera settings are correct, the the creative style of the image is how they want it to be, and then quality controlling the footage as it comes out of the camera, and then backing it all up, making sure that you've got safe, secure, verified backups on hard drives, and then delivering that to the editors and the post-production people. So you're kind of right-hand man to the cinematographer, making sure that everything looks how it needs to look, making sure the camera's is correct, set up correctly. You kind of assist the focus pullers and the camera assistants with settings and all the things that they need. And then you're kind of the go-between between the film set and the editors.
And that industry must have changed dramatically in the time that you've been in it as well.
Hugely. So going back, the first thing I did. Okay, so let's give the whole story here. I studied marine biology. That was my degree because I was obsessed with underwater diving, all the rest of it. I'd seen all the David Attenborough things. We had a neighbor when I was very young who worked in Jeddah on the Red Sea. And he was a very keen diver, and he had a camera, and he would take pictures when he was diving. And when he came home, he would set up the projector in his living room, and he would show all the pictures of the coral reef and the sharks and the fish and all the rest of it. So between that and David Attenborough and some Jacques Cousteau stuff, that's where the excitement for the ocean and diving came in. And then learned to dive when I was 16. My dad took me to Hurghada. We did our open water course. He hated it, never wanted to do it again. And for me, it was kind of the calling. So then studied marine biology, and then through a big twist of fate, like so many people who get into the film industry have just done it through pure luck or knowing someone, or like there's always like the stars have aligned somewhere for most people, and it definitely happened in my case. Like I wanted to get into underwater filming. But I mean, there's not much underwater filming opportunities in the Scottish borders, you know what I mean? So I was very lucky. And when I was at uni, I used to do summers abroad. I did 2 summers in Indonesia doing kind of coral reef research volunteer work out there. And one of the years I was there was a film crew there filming the projects that we were doing. So I kind of met a couple of the camera guys, and they would show incredible footage in the evenings and stuff. And I was like, that's what I want to do. That just looks amazing. And then further on, I had a friend who was very committed to underwater filmmaking and wildlife filmmaking. And she was fully into it, and she was pursuing it hugely. And I wasn't at all. Like I was kind of doing other stuff at the time. I used to do snowboard seasons and bartending. I'd work as a dive guide in the Red Sea and stuff. And she, so this is after uni, and she was approached by this company who are based out in Malaysia to go and work for them. And she already had something lined up. She couldn't do it, but she was like, why don't you do it? And it was a company called Scuba Zoo, and they were the guys that were in Indonesia filming us randomly. So she put me onto them, and I went and met the guy who owned the company at the time down in London, and we had a little meet and greet, and then I went from there. So that was my foot into the film industry, and it was all as a wildlife camera, underwater stuff. So the first year I did with Scuba Zoo, I went to Malaysia first. I think it was like 2 months in Malaysia, learning cameras and all the rest of it. And then our thing was to film guests, film punters on a dive resort. So we would go out with the divers, and we would shoot them, make a little movie, edit it as fast as possible, show it in the evening in the bar, and then they would all buy the movie. And that's where I learned kind of the core of the whole thing. That was my first venture into filmmaking. And it was just pure luck. Like if it wasn't for that, I never realistically would have got my hand on a camera underwater. Like I think I would have been a dive guide for a long time. Like diving is the other big passion of mine. And then, so I started in Malaysia, and then went to the Maldives with them. and doing the same thing. So I spent almost a year in the Maldives filming guests, and we would film stock footage and all the rest of it. And that was just incredible. And then from there, through another completely chance meeting, just like miraculous, I got offered a job at the Save Our Seas Foundation, who's a kind of worldwide marine conservation company. And I joined them as a cameraman in 2007 and spent 4 years with them. And that was just traveling the world, taking part in research projects, filming, shooting stock footage for BBC, National Geographic, all that stuff. We did a couple of larger documentaries. And that's how I got into it. It was two just complete strokes of luck. And I just saw the opportunity and I was like, this is something I have to do. And I just went and did it and just kind of threw myself in. And off we went. And when I was, so Save Our Seas has offices in Cape Town, and we used to do a lot of work in Cape Town. And that was how I first came to South Africa. But a lot of the guys that I worked with on that team were South African. And I had a lot of good mates that were South African from bartending back in Edinburgh. And they were all like, mate, you need to go to Cape Town. You're going to love that place. And I went to Cape Town, loved it. And on one trip met Catherine. And the rest is history, basically. I kind of relocated to South Africa. Or not relocate, like moved to South Africa. That was 2012. And I've been here ever since. But here, it's all been commercials. I ended up working with a company here whose plan was to do a lot of underwater and wildlife stuff. And we ended up so busy with commercials, I've just basically been stuck in that ever since. But I don't regret, like, it's great. To shoot commercials, I mean, no one gets into the film industry because they want to shoot commercials, right? Let's face it. But it's great fun. I love what I do. And it affords me a lot of free time in between shoots to do fly fishing and tying, whatever. So it's been a great, how it's all panned out has been fantastic.
That's lovely, and segues most magnificently into my next section about our little film competition, because of course, as I said in the introduction, you won it. You didn't even know you were in it because Gordon entered the film and said,
surprise. He's like, oh, you've won that. We've won that thing. I was like, okay, perfect.
And it was a wonderful story. And for listeners, if you don't know, what we did was we put up a £250 prize and said to anyone, send us your film. We'll choose a short list, and then the team at Fly Culture will choose their top three. And the winners of those top three would go on to our head judge, Jim Murray, who would choose the winner. We all chose your film as our choice in our top three. And then that went on to Jim, and he said, I've got a winner. And I said, I think I know which one it is. But again, given the conversation we've had as well, you just captured that bigger picture of fishing, didn't you? You captured what it's about. And there's that beautiful line, I think, from Gordy that says, you don't choose fly fishing chooses you. And that summed it up perfectly. And I think that struck a chord with us, and I'm sure many other people who have seen it. Were you pleased with how that came about, how it looked when you'd finished it, and when you sat back and viewed it, and the feedback that you got from people?
Yeah, it was very satisfying. Like, it was great. And thank you so much for running the competition and giving us the exposure. And thanks to Jim for enjoying it. And it was a cool little story to tell. But so the film is on this platform called The Craft, which is me and a mate from here who is a cinematographer and director and fanatical fisherman as well. And we decided we were going to just create a little platform, if you like, of fishing films and kind of just info, but specifically not of the look at me and the big fish I caught in this amazing place thing. There had to be a story and a kind of reason and purpose to the whole thing beyond the catching of the fish. And Gordy was just the perfect person for that. You know what I mean? Like, that's what he's all about. We did another film. I don't know if you saw it. before about Anthea Linsell, or Anthea Piatter as she was known then in the title. And Rob actually shot most of that one. I shot some other bits, but we would like bounce edits back and forth and like compare ideas and stuff. And that's kind of where it's come from. We've got another couple of films in the works now on a guide in South Africa and a rod builder, which are very much on the same kind of vibe. And there's a couple of tutorials coming and all the rest of it. But the problem is, once we got up and running, Rob moved to the UK. So it's been a bit difficult to keep on top of things. But we're like slowly cranking stuff out. But the main point of the whole thing was there has to be a story, and it is not just to be like grip and grin movies of catching epic fish. Like there's enough of that out there, definitely. And I love those films as well. But if like to spend the time to make something, there has to be more to it, I think, for me personally, and for Rob as well. Like that was the defining thing of the whole idea.
And was that a long process then to put together and think about how you and the direction you wanted to take it? Or it sounds as though you had a pretty clear idea in your minds, this is what we want to do with it. And I assume Gordy as well, because I assume he was very easy to work with given his day job as well.
So Gordy's an actor. If anyone doesn't know, that's his day job. That's what he does. He's a full-time actor on screen, commercials, movies, whatever. So that helped hugely. Like it's very difficult filming people who are not comfortable being on camera, or who can blatantly not want to be on camera. You know what I mean? Sometimes you have to convince people, no, let's go and do this. It'll be really cool. And then I hate being on camera. I hate it. And it's like, you can see people change instantly as soon as you point a camera at them. Like I've seen professional actors fold on a film set through the stress and the nerves of having the lights and the cameras point at them. Like it is a stressful thing. And I think as soon as you point a camera at someone, they change. You know what I mean? They try and become the person they're trying to portray on the camera, which is the worst thing you can do unless you're a trained actor. Gordy being a trained actor is perfect. So, I mean, I could have just pointed 2 cameras at Gordy, pressed roll and gone fishing and come back in 4 hours. And he would have had all the dialogue down. But we did we hadn't exactly storyboarded the thing, put it that way. We just had an idea of what we were going to do, a vague outline of what it would be, and we just kind of just went for it, basically. But so I've been up to Lesotho a lot of times. The weather can be horrendous. The river can be blown out. It can rain for weeks. It can be like a tough place to shoot. And we kind of made the plan to go up there, like, right, we're going to do it in these dates, which was prime time season. It was January, I think it was late January. And I'd said to him, listen, man, we might spend the whole time filming fly tying videos in the lodge, or filming videos of the guys cooking, because we have kind of a deal where we give like exposure and content to the guys that own the lodge as well. And then it's coming to the time, well, I kind of said if we get one day of good fishing, which is how it kind of panned out for me personally going up there. Like Gordy had it in the past where he had incredible weeks fishing. He's like, oh my God, if we'd had a camera last week, it would have been incredible type thing. So the day is coming close to leaving for Lesotho. I think it's the day before. Gordy phones me and he's like, weather. I was like, I know. I'd looked at the weather forecast and the forecast was just awful. And I was like, well, it's fine. Like we're not going to pull out. It can be snowing in one valley and it can be sunny in the valley that you're in type thing. So let's just go. And we say, all right, I'll have the camera built. I'll have all the cameras, all the batteries charged, all the rest of it. I think I left at 3 a.m, 4 a.m, just hammered down the road to get to the border post, drive into Lesotho, sun's out, it's beautiful. Get to the lodge like just after lunch. So I'd never met Gordy personally. We'd only ever chatted. I run down to the lodge. He's standing there getting his gear ready. We're like, hi, how's it going? Nice to meet you. Literally, I go grab the gear. The weather's perfect. We head down to the river. So you stand. We were standing at the camp above the river, and you can just see yellowfish pouring into home pool. And I'm like, oh my god, it's happening. Like you hear these stories of incredible conditions in the river, and it can last for a couple of days, and then it can rain for a week, and then you've got to wait for the river, and then it can be incredible for however long. It's very much a place where everyone's like, oh, last week, man, was just incredible. So I'd fished it a lot, and I'd had one epic day, like one really incredible day, like the day that you kind of dream about. And I remember we had driven down to, so back then the dam was a lot lower. So there was a lot more river between the camp and the estuary. So we'd driven down to the bottom of the river at the estuary at kind of breakfast time, and I'd fished the whole way up on my own back to camp, just sight fishing yellows in this perfect river. And afterwards I said the only way that day could have been any better was if I had my dog with me. Like it was that good. And then so we get there for the shoot, the weather's perfect. There's more fish in the river than I've ever seen ever. And it was just absolutely on fire. Like it was ridiculous. So we'd gone from expecting filming fly tying videos in the rain to having the river the best I've ever seen it. So we filmed that afternoon. The next day, we're like, so we got some really nice stuff. I think I shot like a fair amount of the film on that first afternoon. And we're like, thank God we've got something in the can. The rain's coming tomorrow. It's going to be terrible. I think it was like a little bit of rain as after the sun had set. And we were like, no, this is it coming. It's going to be just chaos now with the weather. Wake up the next day and it's bluebird. There's not a cloud in the sky. The river hasn't raised at all. So you can have a thunderstorm 20 miles away and be under blue sky, and that thunderstorm in the distance will blow the river out completely. So we get up, perfect weather, the river's looking perfect, the fish are already active, and the weather just stays like that for the whole day. And then the next day, it's the same. And then I think by the following day after that, I was like, God, we need to actually stop fishing here and shoot the interviews. So we shot the interviews. The weather was perfect again. And it was just like that the whole time. I was there for a week. Gordy stayed on for another week because he was hosting guests. And each of the days that we were there for the filming was better than the best day I'd ever had. Like it was just, I don't know what happened to make things work in our favor that much, but we landed in the butter like so much. Like Rob and I were joking about it the other day. He's like, you were so lucky with that film. And I was like, yep, 100%. To have Gordy, the character, who's an actor, to have perfect conditions, the perfect river, like that'll never happen again. I could go on and make 50 more fly fishing movies and it will never happen again like that. Like pure luck.
Well, fantastic. And I'm pleased that we recognised it a little bit and helped in some tiny way as a result of those wonderful conditions and people behind it. And I really recommend people, if they haven't seen it already, go watch the film, go enjoy it, go subscribe, make sure you keep an eye out for the next films as well. And they capture again, for me, exactly what it's about. It, for me, is wonderful to be able to support creative people as well. It's really, really important to be able to do that. And Owen, we're coming up an hour now. It's absolutely flown by. But if people want to find these films, if they want to connect with you, how do they do so?
So Instagram, so our kind of fly fishing film platform, the Instagram is the craft fly fishing. So _craft_fly fishing. And it's on YouTube as the craft fly fishing. So all the stuff's on there and the new stuff will go on there. And my personal Instagram is OE Bruce, and I have a kind of fly tying, fly fishing Instagram called Owen Bruce Fly Tying, which is just kind of a diary of of what I've been up to, the flies I've tied, and where I've been and whatever. So that's cool. But I would say also, so the Lesotho camp is run by African Waters, which is just it's an inspiring example of community conservation in action. Like it's a fantastic place. I mean, it's a great location to go and fish. It's beautiful, but the way the lodge, or the way the camp impacts and helps the local community is kind of the model on how I think it should be done anywhere in the world. Like it's fantastic. They've put solar power into the village. They help with the school, the children. They've built bridges over the river. Like it's just a fantastic thing. And just being there as a guest, or even just following them on Instagram to see what they're up to is cool. Like it's very interesting. It's a really, really slick operation, and it does a lot of good in the community there in Lesotho. And they're African Waters.
Yeah, we'll have a look out for that. And that's good stuff, needs to be shouted about. So we will do that. We're going to wind up now, but one last question, because I know when we spoke on the phone the other day, I think you mentioned about guitars and music, and you spoke about that today. We have the Fly Culture Spotify page where I try and ask podcast guests to give me a tune. What is the tune that you would suggest for us that we can add to the list that helps set the tone for your day's fishing?
So easy one. I actually saw Xavier Rudd live in Joburg on Sunday, which was incredible. I'd first seen him in Edinburgh years ago. I mean, it must have been 2006, but I've always loved his music, and it was great to see him live. So the track is Messages by Xavier Rudd.
Perfect. I've written that down. Owen, it has been an absolute pleasure to catch up with you. Congratulations on winning our little competition with such a wonderful film. I wish you every success in your professional career. In the films that you're making for fly fishing as well. Thank you for those. We've enjoyed those immensely. And most of all, thank you for taking the time to talk with me on the Fly Culture podcast today.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed it. Cheers.
Everyone, this has been another episode of the Fly Culture podcast. Thank you so much for listening to this. I will, as ever, keep shouting out a bit about creatives, supporting them, and I hope you'll do likewise. As ever, there'll be no charge for this podcast. It's free to download and enjoy. And of course, there'll be some more coming very, very soon. Thanks so much for listening.
The Fly Culture podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly published magazine owned and run by fly anglers. When it comes to fly fishing, we've got you covered.